Welcome back to Proxamer, everybody. And today we're going to be looking at something a little bit different, away from the unit breakdowns, Craftworld overviews, and so forth. And we're actually going to be looking at some of the new changes that just happened with the release of the Nephilim expansion for Warhammer 40k match play. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to essentially be breaking down the changes to command points. So one of the biggest changes that's happened, aside from a lot of new missions and so forth, is the changes to command points that Games Workshop implemented with the new expansion. So essentially, we're going to be looking at what Craftworld, Eldar Stratagems, Warlord traits, and Relics are going to be front runners after the new changes, and which ones are truly worth taking. So essentially what we're going to be doing in this video is just going over the changes to command points in Nephilim, just briefly explaining what the changes were. And we're also going to be looking at which Craftworld, Eldar, Relics, Warlord traits, and Stratagems are considered essential, which means the ones that we cannot absolutely part with, the ones that are basically crucial to the identity of the faction. So in the latest expansion, basically what happened was the initial command points of whatever game you were playing in match play basically got halved. So for example, in Strike Force games, you used to get 12 command points. That's going to go down to 6. In Incursion games, you got 6. That's going to go down to 3. So essentially, in 1,000 to 2,000 point games, you're going to start with 6 command points. And in Incursion, you're going to have 3 command points. Now, instead of gaining 1 command point in your own command phase, basically now you gain a command point each command phase, so yours and your opponent's. This was GW's way of basically spreading the command points longer throughout the game instead of giving you a lot of command points initially. And basically, what this means is that throughout the game, you might have more command points later on the game than you do in the beginning. So you must also spend 1 command point for your initial Warlord trait and Relic. So that free Warlord trait and Relic that you got before now costs command points. 1 command point for each. So a lot of people in my gaming group and in the Warhammer community altogether are very displeased with this change. I think it's because a lot of people liked the fact that we could play around with Relics and Warlord traits a little bit. Definitely made it a little bit more fun to have, our favorite HQ decked out with Warlord traits and Relics. But that is no more. Now you must spend 1 command point for the first Warlord and Relic. And that's on top of our base amount of command points being halved. However, again, this might not actually be that bad. And I was talking to a couple of people in my gaming group about it. And actually, we have come to the consensus, as have a lot of players in general, that on the whole, with few exceptions, the command point changes actually do a good job at balancing the game a little bit and making games less front-loaded. And what I mean by front-loaded is the first couple of turns in the game being absolutely devastating and just being command point dumps to the point where if you make a wrong move, if you deploy something a little bit out of range, or your opponent has a really good way of getting to your units that are out of line of sight, with the way the command points were, your opponent could easily capitalize on that and really alpha strike you very hard. So with the new changes, opponents are less able to do that and dump all their command points out on you in a couple of basically first turn big power swings, essentially. So despite the fact that these changes, I think, brought out a lot of uncertainty in a lot of players, I think as it's been kind of playing out. I think players are realizing that, oh, wow, I really didn't need all these extra Warlord traits and relics. This was just, basically, we were just using these because we had the extra points and we had nothing else to spend it on. So we just kind of, it was in my group, in my gaming group, we just called it command point dump, which is basically you just dumped as many command points as you could on Warlord traits and relics, just to power up your characters because you weren't going to use them on anything else, and you probably weren't going to need that many in the first few turns of the game. So I actually have liked these changes as far as balance on a whole. And in general, I think after several games of playing with these changes, to be honest, I figured out on a personal level, I haven't really needed a lot of the Warlord traits and relics. A lot of them were very powerful and very good, but none of them were as good as the essential Stratagems and Warlord trait, which I will go over in this video, that truly make up their worth. So what we're going to be talking about first is, what does this mean, though, these command point changes for my Craftworld Eldar list? So essentially what this means is you're going to have less command points for pre-game spending, as well as the first couple of turns. So you're not going to be able to dump a bunch of command points trying to alpha strike enemy targets and just wipe out the enemy army in a couple turns. Eldar especially could do this exceptionally well with things like Blade Storm and things like Resonator Shard and things like that. So you're going to have less points for pre-game spending in your first couple of turns. So you're going to have to make harder decisions when it comes to using those first turn stratagems. And in addition to that, you're going to need to kind of prepare what pre-game command points you actually want to spend to ensure that you actually have a few on the first turn for whatever you need. So typically that's going to mean leaving a few starting command points left over just so you have enough for the first couple turns of the game. So what should you spend your pre-game command points on? What is actually essential? So are there any Warlord traits that we need to keep? Are there any relics that we need to keep? And what about the essential stratagems that are very powerful, especially a lot of which for Eldar are pre-game stratagems that you have to buy in your list? So as far as essential Warlord traits, there's only one that I've really seen as essential, and this is essentially just because it refunds command points. And of course, I'm talking about Seer of the Shifting Vector. It'll cost you one command point to use, but it refunds command points when you and your opponent uses them. So anytime you and your opponent use a command point during the game, you roll a dice, on a roll of 6, you get a command point. So pretty useful. It more than makes up for itself over the course of the game, and this ability actually got a hidden buff. The reason why it got a hidden buff is because before, a lot of the command points that your opponent would spend and you would spend were before the game, and thus Seer of the Shifting Vector wouldn't be taken into account. However, because there's going to be more command points within your turns, both yours and your enemies, in each phase, because your enemy gets 2 command points a turn or around per battle round, and you get 2 points per battle round. What that means is that you guys are going to be using more command points as the game goes on, and this will actually increase the potential of this Warlord trait and probably make it a little more efficient at regaining command points, not just in the first couple of turns, but throughout the whole game. And I've actually found this to be the case. Seer of the Shifting Vector I have found to actually be very effective in gaining at least 1 command point per battle round. So essentially you spend 1 command point on this, but you, on average, probably will gain about 5 command points throughout the game. So in every one of my games I played, I at least got 5. Well, yeah, I got 5 command points, essentially. So 1 per turn, at the very least. So pretty good and honestly pretty essential. But what about essential relics? And I really did a lot of digging on this. And honestly, in general, and I'm speaking in a general way here, I don't think any relics are actually worth taking in the beginning of the game. Oh, but Proxy Hammer, why do you think that? There's a lot of great powerful relics out there that are just really effective. Like, what about the Sunstorm, for example, to give your Farseer or Autarch objective secured? And what about all the other ones that are good? And honestly, even if we had a few more command points, let's say we started out with 8, I might be tempted to put a few essential relics on here. But the fact that you only have 6 means you have to make really hard decisions about what you're actually going to spend your command points on pre-game, because you need to save a couple of command points for some key stratagems, which I'm going to talk about in a second, that are very unique to Eldar and very basically essential for the success of the faction. So I didn't really see any essential relics, but there could be a few in some niche lists. I know if you're running an Iyanden list, you might want to invest a little bit in the Citronome of Iyanden. That could be a useful one, but although, to be honest with you, I think maybe that one's not even that useful. And there could be a few here and there in some niche builds that are required, but in general, I don't think any relics are really that essential. And lastly, what about the essential stratagems? So here are the essential stratagems that I think really define the Craftworld Eldar and make them very powerful and versatile on the tabletop in regards to their ability to redeploy and come into the battle as reinforcements. So Webway Strike is a 1-3 command point ability. This allows units to come in as reinforcements. And this is great for setting up charges out of reserve or to have your unit come in exactly where you need them safely. This is a fantastic ability for keeping high priority targets safe in reserve that normally would get shot up or killed otherwise if they were left on the battlefield. Webway Strike is absolutely essential for a lot of Eldar lists. Phantasm is another very essential stratagem because it allows up to 3 of your units to redeploy, and this can divert and misdirect your opponent's forces and make it much easier for you to capture points in the board and really play a lot of hard mind games with their opponent, forcing them to often misdeploy a lot of their units in an effort to try to figure out what you're going to do. So Phantasm is a fantastic ability, and I think it's honestly one of the key abilities and stratagems that Eldar have in the pregame. Honestly, my favorite stratagem. I'm just going to say it. It's won me so many games. It's made it so much easier for a lot of my games that I went second in to, redirect my opponent, misdirect my opponent so that his first turn wasn't as bad. And it's allowed me to honestly survive a lot of situations, which I normally wouldn't have if I didn't have this ability. And the last one is Seer Council. Now, this is a maybe, but I think that Seer Council is probably one of the essential ones because you get better psychic casts for it, and you get a safer Farseer when he's near the Warlocks. Now, the reason I say that this is essential is because Eldar psychic powers, getting them off on a regular basis in a game is absolutely essential. You're not always going to have your Strands of Fate, and you're not always going to want to use Strands of Fate when casting some psychic powers. Having the Seer Council stratagem makes it much easier for your Farseer to cast abilities, psychic powers, and just in general, just be better, essentially. And a lot safer because the Warlocks actually do provide a pretty good Lookout Sir benefit. Even though it's not as good as it was before, it is still pretty good because as long as you at least have one Warlock left in that unit of Warlocks, your Farseer can benefit from Lookout Sir even if there's no other units around. And it saved me on a couple of occasions, I have to admit. So if we take the time to add these up, basically at the minimum, this is at least 3 command points to 4 command points of spending. If you want to go the extra mile and put 2 units in for Webway Strike, and you want to use all these, that's all 6 of your command points. Now, obviously, one of these has to go, whether it be the Seer Council in some cases or the extra Webway Strike. But essentially, you're not going to be left with too many extra command points here. And a lot of the times, I'm going to be honest with you, it's going to be very difficult to fit anything other than the essential stratagems into your list, and Seer of the Shifting Vector. So Seer of the Shifting Vector is 1 point. Webway Strike is 1 point usually, but it could be up to 3 if you want to have 2 units in there. Phantasm is 2 command points, and Seer Council is 1 command point. That already puts us at 7 command points. So what that means is just with the essentials, we're already over, okay? So what does this mean? This means that probably you're going to have to cut something, whether it be Seer Council or the extra 2 command points on having 2 units in Webway Strike. You're going to need to cut at least one of those things, because I do think Seer of the Shifting Vector is very useful in most matchups. You do need that for continuous command point gain throughout the battle. Now, I also think that there could be a slightly different way around Webway Strike to where you can have 2 units in reserve, but one of your units being in strategic reserve and one of your units just being in Webway Strike. That'll cost you typically 2 command points instead of 3 command points. Although strategic reserve does have its downsides as well, because you have to come in the board edge or through a Webway portal, which you may or may not have in your list. And to be honest with you, there's not too much room outside of this. So these are really the stratagems that are necessary for every Eldar game. And even before the changes, I was still running all 3 of these in most of my games, if not all of my games. Occasionally I wouldn't use Seer Council, if I was kind of running a list that I didn't think required it, or I wasn't running a unit of Warlocks in a certain list. But in general, these are the stratagems that I've found to be the most important and necessary in most Eldar lists. And again, I think these really get down to the identity of Craftworld Eldar, which is being able to misdirect enemy units, being able to redeploy very quickly, and also just being able to keep your enemy guessing. And I think at least 2 of these do that to a really fantastic degree. So in conclusion, I think nearly all of the Warlord traits and relics have become non-essential because of these changes, except for maybe Seer of the Shifting Vector. Webway Strike, Phantasm, and Seer Council. And I say maybe on Seer Council because maybe you don't have a unit of Warlocks in your army. It's not 100% necessary, but it is really good. And I think these were always really essential. And now it's even more important to save command points for them for the pregame. And unfortunately, what that means is a lot of people are going to have to drop their Warlord traits, their extra Warlord traits, and their extra relics that they bought with their models. I know they're really cool and really awesome, but honestly, they don't help the faction play better as a faction. It's just a couple of things here and there that make certain units a little bit better. It's nothing that's going to win you or lose you a game, essentially, for the most part. Unless the game is really, really, really close. And honestly, even the Sunstorm, which has objective secured, there are other things that can do that, right? We have other powers like Will of Azurian, which can give a unit objective secured as well. And I think this is also going to change the way people select their psychic powers with their Farseers. I can definitely see people taking 3 Farseers in lists now to get that Will of Azurian, to get that little extra objective secured, and stuff like that. So we'll see as people play more games. I think basically a consensus will be reached within the community. But I know for a fact, at least within my own gaming group as of now, we've come to the consensus that extra Warlord traits and relics that we were purchasing were probably pretty, unnecessary to begin with. We only were using them because we had so many command points, we didn't really know what to do with them. And I don't think this has affected Eldar a whole lot, I have to admit. I thought it was going to affect Eldar more than a couple of other factions, but I actually found out that it really didn't. And the factions I actually feel sorry for, believe it or not, and I'm going to talk about this in a future video this week a little bit, is Chaos Demons. I think there's a guy who plays Chaos Demons in our group, and he's been complaining probably more than anybody else about the changes. Because he was running multiple patrol detachments and things like that. He was trying to get a bunch of different abilities and stuff. I don't know too much about Chaos Demons, but I know that they get stronger when they have certain Warlord traits and relics and stuff like that. They have some really powerful ones, and yeah, he was complaining big time about that. But Again, other than that, a lot of the players in my gaming group, and from what I've heard just on different forums and stuff, aren't too upset about most of the changes. Now, what people don't like, obviously, is the fact that you have to spend 1 command point on your first Relic and Warlord trait. But I think over time we'll get used to this, and, you know, who knows? Maybe GW will come out with a slightly new, kind of rule change in a couple months, and we'll probably have to wait and see about that. Who knows what will happen? But for now, buckle up. As the dwarfs would say it in Warhammer Fantasy, tighten your belts and, start making the stone bread, because we're going to be tight on resources for a while. So, essential stratagems, again, to reiterate: Webway Strike, Phantasm, Seer Council, essential Warlord trait, Seer of the Shifting Vector. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I know this is a short video. We got a couple more coming out this week. One of them is going to be centered on Swooping Hawks, so look forward to that if you're a really big fan of Swooping Hawks. I'm doing a video on how to make the best use out of them, kind of similar to the one I did on Warp Spiders. All right, everybody. Have a good one. Peace out. See you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody.